Today we are going to write equations of lines and inequalities from a graph. So you have already graphed lines and inequalities, and today we're just going to do the opposite. Before you were given the equation and you came up with the graph. Today you're given the graph and then you come up with the equation. So let's start with number 1. In order to write the equation of a line, you need two things. You need your slope and you need your y-intercept. So, looking at this graph, we are going to figure out what each of those are. My y-intercept on this line is where I'm crossing the y-axis. So my y-intercept here is 0. I'm crossing at 0, 0. My slope is how I'm moving. So it's my rise over my run. On this one, I am going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm rising 5. And I'm moving over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, 5 over 5 reduces to positive 1. So my slope is positive 1. If I plug this into y equals mx plus b, then this becomes y equals 1x plus 0. I plugged in my slope. I plugged in my y-intercept. You can leave it like this, or you can simplify this down. This is actually our linear parent function, and you can write it as y equals x. Both of those answers are acceptable. Let's look at number 2. On number 2, my slope is going down 1 over 1, 2, 3, 4. I am rising negative 1. I am running positive 4. My y-intercept is crossing the y-axis at 3. So, plugging these two things in, I would write my answer as y equals negative 1/4 x plus 3. We plug in our m, we plug in our b. Moving on to number 3, I have a horizontal line. We know from previous units that a horizontal line means that my slope is 0 and my y-intercept on this one is crossing at positive 2. If you're stuck on this one, remember our slope song. Horizontal is our hero. That's because the slope is 0. So if I plug this into y equals mx plus b, then I have y equals 0x plus 2. The more simplified version of this is y equals 2. You don't have to write the 0x. Moving on to number 4. Number 4 is the opposite. We have a vertical line. Remember from our song, undefined, undefined, that's the slope of a vertical line. My slope is undefined, and I'm actually not crossing the y-axis here, so I don't have a b value. Instead, vertical lines are the ones that are different from all the others. With vertical lines, we're actually crossing the x-axis, and this one is crossing at negative 1, 2, 3, 4. So the way you would write this is x equals negative 4. It's very important that you understand the difference between 3 and 4. When you have a horizontal line, y will equal a number. When you have a vertical line, x will equal a number. I want you to pause the video, try 5 and 6, and then restart to check with me. On number 5, I am going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I am running over positive 1. So my slope is 6. It goes up to the right, so I know it should be a positive number, which is good. We got positive 6. My y-intercept is crossing at negative 2. So when I put these two things together, my answer is y equals 6x minus 2. Checking number 6, I have a negative slope here. My slope is going down 1, 2, 3, 4. It is going right 1, 2, 3, 4. So negative 4 over 4 reduces to a slope of negative 1. For my y-intercept, I am crossing the y-axis at 0. Plugging these two things in, I would write this as y equals negative 1x plus 0. A more simplified version of this is just y equals negative x. Those mean the exact same thing. Switching over to the back of your notes, it's very similar, except now we have to worry about an inequality sign. We've already graphed inequalities, so we already know what they mean. Whenever you're coming up with your inequality, you just have to pay attention to where you're shading and if your line is solid or dotted. The beginning part of this is the exact same as the front. I still need to figure out what my slope is, and I still need to figure out what my y-intercept is. So, starting with my slope, I am going up 1, 2, 3. I am going right 1, 2, 3. So my slope is positive 1. My y-intercept, I'm crossing at 0, so b is 0. Now, we have a solid line here, so when we're choosing our inequality sign, I know that it has to be underlined. It has to either be less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. Remember, solid lines are underlined, dotted lines are not. The way you can figure out which one is by looking at your y-intercept. For this, I am shading above my y-intercept, which means I am going to use greater than or equal to. Remember from our previous unit, shading above means greater. When I put this all together, my final answer is y is greater than or equal to 1x plus 0. Just like we did on the front, if you want to simplify this a little bit, you could also just write this as y is greater than or equal to x. They mean the same thing. Looking at number 8, we have a negative slope here. I am going down 2, right 2, which reduces to negative 1 for my slope. My y-intercept is at 0, 0, so b equals 0. This is a dotted line, so I'm now choosing between less than or greater than. Remember, dotted line means you don't underline the sign. And for this specific problem, if you look at your y-intercept, we are shading below it. Well, shading below the y-intercept tells me that I am going to use less than. Putting this all together, my final answer is y is less than negative 1x plus 0. If you want to write this in a more simplified way, you can write it as y is less than negative x. Let's look at number 9. On number 9, I have a horizontal line, which we know by now means that my slope is 0. Horizontal is our hero. That's because our slope is 0. I am crossing the y-axis at 2, so b is 2. I have a solid line, so I'm choosing between less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. And I am shading below my y-intercept, which tells me I am going to use less than or equal to. Putting this all together, I have y is less than or equal to 0x plus 2. If you want to write this in a more simplified way, you don't have to write the 0x. You can just write y is less than or equal to 2. I want to skip to number 12 to look at our vertical line here. For vertical lines, we know by now that our slope is undefined. Undefined, undefined, that's the slope of a vertical line. I am crossing the x-axis here at +2, and I know that undefined lines are written with an x and then wherever you're crossing. From here, I need to choose my inequality sign. Well, I have a dotted line, so I know it's either going to be less than or greater than. We don't underline our signs for dotted lines. For x values get bigger as you move to the right. Since I am shading to the right of my line, and I know x's get bigger to the right, I am going to use greater than. So putting this together, the inequality for this graph is x is greater than 2. At this point, I want you to pause the video, try 10 and 11, and then restart to check. Looking at number 10, my slope goes up 1, 2, 3, 4. It moves right, +1. So my slope is 4. I'm crossing the y-axis at -1, 2, 3, 4. So B is -4. I have a solid line, so I'm choosing between less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. This one's a little tricky to choose your sign, but remember to always look at your y-intercept. For this one, I am shading below my y-intercept, so I want to use less than or equal to. Putting this all together, my answer is y is less than or equal to 4x minus 4. I plug in my slope, I plug in my y-intercept. Finally, let's check number 11. On number 11, I have a negative slope. I am moving down to right 3. So my slope is -2 over 3, rise over run. My y-intercept on this one, I'm crossing the y-axis at -3. I have a dotted line, so I know I'm choosing between less than and greater than. And for this one, I'm shading above my y-intercept, which means I want to use greater than. Putting this all together, I have y is greater than -2/3 x minus 3. If you're having trouble with the meaning of slope or how to graph a line or graph an inequality, I recommend re-watching my videos on slope and on graphing lines and inequalities. That might help you a little bit. But just remember that to write an equation of a line, all you need is your slope and your y-intercept. You plug in your m, you plug in your b. To write an inequality, you need your slope, your y-intercept, and then you need to choose your inequality. Remember, solid lines are underlined, dotted lines are not.